Top of the morning to you, and welcome to our midweek edition of our special coverage of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. I'm Olumide Macaulay. The headlines. Explosions seen over Ukrainian capital Kyiv amid reports of Russian drone attacks. Russia calls second drone strike on Moscow skyscraper terrorist attack. Ukrainian army relies on self-made Kamikaze drones in war against Russia. A warm welcome again. Explosions were seen over the Ukrainian capital Kyiv in the early hours of today amidst reports of Russian drone strikes across the country. According to the mayor of Kyiv, Vitaly Klitschko, and military officials, anti-aircraft units shut down drones attacking the capital, with drone debris falling in 3 districts but causing no injuries. Air raid alerts were lifted for the capital, the surrounding Kyiv region, and most other parts of the country. Authorities in the southern coastal region of Odessa reported that Russian drones attacked port and grain storage facilities early today, setting some on fire. However, there have been no reports of casualties. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says the latest drone strike on the Odessa port infrastructure by Russia was an attack on global food security and called on the international community to intervene. President Zelensky wrote on Telegram, "Russian terrorists have once again attacked ports, grain and global food security. The world must react." President Zelensky added that Russia can and must be stopped in the face of attacks that deliberately destroyed Ukrainian grain elevators in Odessa. The Ukrainian leader also commended Ukraine's air defense units for another heroic night after the Ukrainian Air Force shut down 23 Iranian Shahed drones that were aimed at Odessa. But what does Russia have to say in the wake of the recent drone attacks it experienced on its side? Well, the Kremlin didn't have much to say today, only that it was clear that a threat existed after the latest attack on Moscow, in which a high-rise building in Moscow's business district was struck for the second time in 3 days. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov said measures are being taken after that attack. Russia's defense ministry called the latest incident an attempted Ukrainian terrorist attack. However, Kyiv has not yet claimed responsibility for the recent incidents on Russian territory. Now, it seems as though both sides are still on each other with tit-for-tat action. Russia said its forces hit Ukrainian targets and repelled attacks in several directions, while Ukraine said it had launched offensives on multiple fronts. According to the Russian Defense Ministry daily report released, the Russian armed forces repelled Ukrainian attacks in the directions of Krasny Liman and Donetsk and continued to launch offensive operations in the directions of Kupiansk. In Kharkov, the Russians hit a workshop that assembled drones for the Ukrainian army. In the Zaporizhzhia region, Russian forces carried out attacks at the command of the Ukrainian Marine Corps. In the Donetsk region, Russian troops struck the ammunition depots of the 24th Mechanized Brigade of the Ukrainian Army and shot down a Ukrainian Air Force Su-25 fighter jet. Meanwhile, the General Staff of the Ukrainian Armed Forces said its troops repelled Russian attacks in the Kupiansk direction. The Ukrainian Air Force also launched multiple strikes against Russian military personnel and equipment and its air defense systems. In the meantime, officials in Kharkiv, that's Ukraine's second largest city, said that drones hit populated areas of that location, and one drone destroyed 2 floors of a college dormitory. The head of the Kharkiv Regional Police, Vladimir Timoshenko, said there were 6 or 7 Shahed-type drones involved in the attack, in which 1 person was injured. However, the college building was empty at the time of the strike. Valery Gerasimov, that's the name of the chief of the general staff of Russia's armed forces, has visited Russian troops in Ukraine's Zaporizhzhia region. According to the Russian Defense Ministry, Gerasimov inspected a command center and underscored the importance of preemptive strikes against Ukrainian forces. An accompanying video showed him poring over a map, receiving briefings in an office, and climbing later into a helicopter. Gerasimov was for many months the target of savage criticism from Wagner mercenary leader Yevgeny Prigozhin and some Russian military bloggers over Russia's failings in its special military operation, as it describes it. After Wagner staged a brief mutiny uprising against the defense establishment on June the 24th, there were questions as to whether Gerasimov will keep his job. More than 2 weeks elapsed before he was seen again in public on July the 10th. Ukrainian drone pilot Mikhailo tested self-made Kamikaze drones near the southeastern Zaporizhzhia front line as the army's counteroffensive was ongoing. Troops at the spearhead of Ukraine's counteroffensive recently said a battle last week along the front in the southeast proved to be tougher and bloodier than expected, with plans going awry and an enemy that was well prepared. Equipping FP7 drones with explosives and taking them for test flights, 25-year-old Army drone pilot Mikhailo explained it was very difficult to successfully fly and hit a target. He said, quote, "Pilot must always be in full control of the drone, of his flight. It can attack at speed, from height, in various ways. Each pilot flies the drone in his own style, in his own way." And Mr. Mikhailo Fedorov, a Ukrainian deputy prime minister, said that about 1,700 drones were on their way to the front lines to help with the offensive. And we have joining us on the program this morning Professor David Aorawo, a professor and head of Department of History and Strategic Studies, University of Lagos, Southwest Nigeria, joining us from Akoka on the Lagos mainland. Good morning and welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me.
It's our pleasure, Professor. Let's begin, before we get to the nitty-gritty of the latest events concerning the counteroffensive. Yesterday's bringing down of the statue in Kiev of the Soviet emblem and replacing it with the with the Ukrainian trident, does that remind you in any way of, tell us how you see it as being symbolic, because that has been there since last year and they didn't think of bringing it down. It was a monument and obviously a replica to the Soviet era. Reminds me of the Berlin Wall when it came down and East and West Germany became one country. How symbolic is it that they decided to go ahead and bring down the symbol of that monument, which they say by the Ukrainian Day celebrations, it will be replaced by the Ukrainian trident?
Well, the development, the bringing of the statue and all the other activities that Ukraine has carried out reminds us or encapsulates the issues in the conflict. On the one hand, Russia is striving to revive the old Soviet empire. On the other, Ukraine is trying to assert itself and remind Putin that the Soviet Union, as it then was, has ended and should be forgotten. And then that brings to mind what I think has been the strategic miscalculation of Russia in this invasion. At this time, what one would have expected would have been that Russia would try to win hearts and minds of the former, the parts that made up the Soviet Union that are now independent countries. But rather than try to win hearts and minds, because there's a whole lot they have in common. They have the same, racial stock. But Russia has, decided to carry out assertive interventionism as a way of, trying to force them back to try to recreate the Soviet Union that disintegrated on Christmas Day of 1991. So it is symbolic because it brings to the minds of Ukrainians that every element, every symbol that identifies the invader will be removed. Of course, on the other hand, of course, those are the things that Russia wants to, sustain, even expand, if it's able to have its way in this invasion. So, in a sense, the removal of the statute and the replacement, it reflects development between Russia and Ukraine in microcosm.
How difficult or easy you think will this be, given that both countries have such far-flung historical and cultural ties? Many people in Ukraine still speak Russian Ukraine, that is Ukrainian speaking Russian, and that is being discouraged by the Ukrainian government, but it's so enmeshed in the fabric of their society that it has to be discouraged for it to be taken out of the way. But it seems as though now, with the bringing down of that emblem on that statue, the Ukrainians are eviscerating everything that ever had to do with Russia in their past.
It is expected that Ukraine will try to do something like this, to try to obliterate anything Russian in Ukraine, given the current hostility. But you see, in the analysis of social relations, we always say that when there is inveterate animosity, as we have seen, develop between the Russians and the Ukrainians, you see developments like this trying to, discourage accepting anything that reflects the culture of the other, either way. But when things swing to one extreme like this, they will likely swing to another extreme at some point, and they will find an equilibrium. So moving forward, the Ukrainians will still speak Russian, and there will also be those who speak the different languages in Ukraine, in Russia as well. This is just a temporary extreme measure that are taken by both sides because of the current hostility. Moving forward, these things cannot be entirely obliterated. The interaction, has developed over so many centuries that it is not possible to just wipe off within a short time. But in a time of war like this, all of these things are expected.
Noted. Now, the counteroffensive continues, but at the back of that, or in front of that, are these drone strikes that are happening on either side. Ukraine has been able to penetrate Russia's air defenses by striking singular targets of that particular building twice. Russia has done them the favor in a negative way by continuing their drone strikes. What's your impression of how the war is going at the moment?
It simply confirms the point we have made all the while, that after fighting for some time, there will be a stalemate. This is just a glaring example of a stalemate in the war. Russia, once in a while, will attack a couple of towns in Ukraine. Ukraine also will bring down Russian drones and also attack, some facilities in Russia. One way this way, one way the other way. And sometimes the other time, Ukraine destroyed the infrastructure that will enable Russia to be able to, achieve this logistical efficiency. Back and forth. It's a reflection of the state of stalemate that this war has reached. And as we have warned several times, neither side will easily be able to win this war. And the earlier they recognize this reality and come to serious negotiations that will bring this war to an end, the better for both sides. So penetration here, bringing down drones here, attacking here, killing the people here, that is where we are now. And it's a reflection of the fact that this war is in the condition of stalemate.
The collateral damage on the part of the Ukrainians has been widespread, especially concerning their infrastructure, but particularly in reference to the UNESCO World Heritage Sites. Do you think Russia is deliberately targeting Ukraine's World Heritage Sites?
Exactly. Russia has been a bit more nasty. The approach has been no holds barred. We have seen civilian targets attacked. We have seen hospitals attacked. We have seen, sites that normally in times of war should not be attacked, being attacked. When the war breaks out, it's supposed to be between the military of one country and the military of the other country. But what we have seen, in fact, one way we determine whether a country is committing crimes against humanity is when it moves beyond attacking military infrastructure or military personnel to civilians, hospitals, heritage sites, as Russia has done. These are all ways to try to bring Ukraine to its knees for Russia to, win the war. But the support of the West is so massive, especially the United States. The support is so massive that it is not likely that Russia is going to win this war anytime soon. It may drag on for decades. If reason does not prevail, concessions are granted to be able to forge a common ground to bring the war to an end. It's understandable that all of these things are happening, but these are not the kind of things that a serious-minded country, a country that wants itself to be respected in the global community, to be doing, to be going to attack hospitals, attack schools, and attack heritage sites, as Russia has done so many times in the course of this war.
Professor, let's talk about the support for the Ukrainians, as you alluded in your submission just now. The United States, do you think their support will be unlimited in scope as far as the war continues to drag on? Many have criticized NATO's position, and people who have a more conspiratorial view are saying that NATO is at the helm of the global New World Order army that is being championed, and that this conflict in Ukraine is going to cause for an emergence of a NATO that is so strong and so united that a new world order will emerge that will bring all nations, as it were, under one umbrella. That may be in the field of a conspiracy theory, but what do you think? Is NATO also taking advantage or stands to benefit or is indeed benefiting from this conflict in Ukraine with a resurgence of their importance, militarily speaking?
I would like to start with the United States, its position and its support. For now, the support is almost limitless. What happens in the next election will be very crucial to how the United States continues to, act in this war. If Biden wins, the support will likely continue in this pattern. But if some other person in the Republican side, maybe Trump wins, of course, there will be a change in the dynamics of the support in the war. So for now, until the elections, until January 20th of the other year, when the term of Biden comes to an end, this pattern will likely continue of unlimited support for Ukraine by the United States. But of course, after Biden's term is over, if it continues, the same pattern will likely continue. But if it does not, there will likely be a shift, a drastic reduction in the support that the U.S. will give to Ukraine. But that is just in the realm of conjecture. For the EU, yes, the EU has benefited. The EU has expanded its membership. Of course, will expand its membership moving forward. And of course, there is solidarity for EU, there's solidarity for NATO, in this. Of course, NATO has expanded its membership. Some countries are still applying to join. Sweden will soon join, Finland and all that. So, in some sense, the mistake that Putin has made, what Putin was trying to check, Putin has not helped to expand. Putin was trying to check the expansion of NATO, and now by his action, it has not helped because countries that thought they were safe, not being part of NATO. With the invasion of Ukraine, they have now become apprehensive, and for self-preservation, they have now applied. Of course, Finland has joined. Sweden, of course, just around the corner. So it is not direct. It is not by its own direct action. It's taking advantage of, development so far. But to speak of a new world order in which everybody will be on one side and all that, I mean, we have had what the lessons of history teach is that you have things like this. Of course, it's like applying the dialectics. You have the thesis the antithesis and synthesis, creating a new thesis. After the Cold War, everybody thought that the world would go all capitalist and liberal democratic. But as the years passed, we had an antithesis developing, which was why people who thought that the world was unipolar, they are now saying the world is multipolar because other poles have emerged. Yes, NATO has benefited, will benefit, but that will not bring the world into one fold of a new world order.
Finally now, as we approach these mediation talks said to be organized in Saudi Arabia at the behest of Ukraine and Saudi Arabia, but excluding Russia, how much of an impact do you think this can have?
We can't be so sure, but if Russia is permanently excluded, it will not have any impact. It will not work. We want to assume that this initial stage, Russia is excluded for some progress will be made, after which Russia will be brought in. But if they continue negotiations without Russia, it will not work. So our advice is that after these preliminary meetings, at some point, Russia has to be brought in. I mean, you can't shift someone's head in his absence. Has to be brought in for some comprehensive discussion to take place that will be effective. I mean, Russia is the major player. So any negotiation, any discussion, any attempt to forge some consensus moving forward without Russia being a part of it will never work. So we want to assume that those who are carrying out these discussions are knowledgeable enough to know that Russia will, maybe at these initial stages, they are trying to lay the framework, after which Russia will be brought into the discussions, and hopefully, just hopefully, that might help to kickstart a serious discussion that will lead to an agreement that will bring this war to an end.
But before we go, are we seeing the embers of the end of a dictatorial leadership in Russia? In your first reply, you talked about a reminiscence of the Soviet Union in the mind of Vladimir Putin. He wants the old Soviet Union back, but the man is too politically savvy. He's too, for want of a better term, he's too versed in world politics to think that this is feasible in this century, in this way. Do you see that after the elections in Russia, for which he says he will not stand to be re-elected as president, but that may change, that is Vladimir Putin, that this nationalist Russian ideology is down the tubes?
What I foresee, I confirm what you have said. Putin is Machiavellian in his approach to both global and local politics, and that is what has kept him in power until now. At some point, he left, then he brought Medvedev, and then they came back. Machiavellian in his approach to politics. Realist and all. I do not see an abandonment of the nationalist fervor in Russia. But what I do see is if Putin does not stand for election and some other person comes in, it will be very difficult to find anybody who will be as extreme as Putin. And so all of these assertive interventionism, all of these attempt to recreate the old Soviet Union will not be pursued. But Russians will continue to remain nationalistic. They will continue to want to have some influence over the states that were part of former Soviet Union. And that is the pattern I foresee moving forward. That is assuming that Putin does not stand and some other person comes in. There will not likely be a radical departure from the path now, because Putin is going to have a hand in who comes in. And you can be sure that Putin will not support anybody who would want to throw away the idea of nationalist Russia. So what I foresee is a reduction in this nationalism and attempts to recreate the old Soviet Union, but it is not a project that will be entirely abandoned.
Professor, he has never said or alluded, well, he may have alluded to it by his actions, that he wants the old Soviet Union back. Could you also, for the sake of balance, be that Russia just wants to remain as powerful as it always has been and have the countries that were in the old Soviet Union that were sympathetic to that union remain its firm partners, and not to say that they want to colonize other countries, they want to absorb Ukraine, but they may want to absorb the Russian sympathetic parts of Ukraine.
Yeah, yes. What Russia wants to do is to control as much as possible, to have influence as much as possible, and maybe annex, where Russian-speaking people are dominant, try to annex on the one hand, and try to dominate the other former, states now that were former part of the former Soviet Union, to dominate as much as possible. So two things. First, annex, if possible, those areas where you have a large number of Russian-speaking people, and two, to be dominant as much as possible over the states now that were formerly part of the old Soviet Union. But the point I'm making is that Putin is making a mistake. He's not as intelligent as I thought he was. The world has moved beyond colonization, annexation, and like it is said, wherever oppression exists, resistance will exist. It may differ in character and form, but it never ceases. So what countries that, understand all of these dynamics do now is to win hearts and minds. Putin should ask himself, why are these countries tilting towards the United States? He's not invading them, he's not forcing them. Why are they moving towards the United States? Why was it that Ukraine had a leader that was tilting towards Russia and it was rejected? So what countries do these days is to try to win hearts and minds. Diplomacy has different levels. Soft power is now very prominent across the world because, there's now enlightenment. Everybody wants to assert himself, self-determination. So that is a mistake. Russia could still do that moving forward. If a new leader comes in and he told that part of soft power, say, oh, we are all the same stock, let us come together. Russia will have greater influence over these former Soviet Union parts that are now independent countries than trying to invade. This invasion, like I said several times, is a huge strategic miscalculation.
Well, as we speak, that invasion continues. And as this program is being broadcast now, there are still people at the front lines in Ukraine, in Zaporizhia, in Bakhmut, for the counteroffensive, still fighting this war. Thank you so much for your contributions and insight this morning, Professor David Aworawo, Professor and Head of Department of History and Strategic Studies, University of Lagos.
Thank you very much.
After the break, the United States says Russia prepared to return to Black Sea grain deal talks. Details in a moment. Please stay with us. Welcome back. We're in the sophomore stretch of our coverage of Russian invasion of Ukraine today. U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations, Linda Thomas Greenfield, says the United States has been told that Russia is prepared to return to talks on a deal that had allowed the safe Black Sea export of Ukraine grain. She said if Russia wants to get its fertilizer to global markets and facilitate agricultural transactions, they have to return to the deal.
And about the grain deal, you asked for my personal views. I'm a glass half full kind of person. I always see the possibilities. I hope that Russia will come to understand the importance of this grain deal. They benefited from this grain deal, and we have seen indications that they might be interested in returning to discussions. So we will wait to see whether that actually happens. I have, what we have been told is that they are prepared to return to discussions, and we haven't seen any evidence of that yet. But I suspect that they know if they want to get their fertilizer out to market, they want the continuation of the efforts to find a way to make the payments that they require, that they're going to have to return to this deal. So I continue to be hopeful, despite the fact that there's not a lot to hope for.
The Kremlin said that the topic of expanding the BRICS group of nations will be high on the agenda of the group's summit, which is due to take place in South Africa on August 22nd to the 24th. BRICS current members are Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. South Africa said last month that more than 40 other nations had expressed interest in joining the group. While acknowledging nuances within the current five-nation group about expanding its membership, Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov said that the fact that such a debate was taking place testifies to the great potential of the association and its growing authority. Russia will be represented at the summit by Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, not by President Vladimir Putin. The Kremlin has said President Putin will dial in to the BRICS summit by video call. Belarusian leader Alexander Lukashenko taunted Poland over the presence of Russian Wagner mercenaries near the NATO country border, saying Warsaw should thank him for keeping them in check. Last week, the Polish Prime Minister said a group of 100 Wagner fighters had moved closer to the Belarusian city of Grodno near the Polish border, describing the situation as increasingly dangerous. President Lukashenko, in his latest comments, appeared at first to deny that, then immediately to roll back or backpedal on the denial. He was quoted as saying, "No Wagner detachments of 100 people moved here, and if they do, then only to transfer their military experience to the Belarusian brigade concentrated in Brest and Grodno." President Lukashenko has helped President Putin in the Ukraine war by letting him launch it in part from the Belarusian territory and allowing the use of its bases to train Russian weapons. The United Nations resident and humanitarian coordinator for Ukraine, Denise Brown, says that the need of Ukraine's populations are increasing and that more and more psychological support is needed. She was speaking virtually following a recent trip to the southern Ukrainian cities of Odessa and Mykolaiv. Odessa's ports have been regular targets for Russian attacks since Moscow withdrew on July the 17th from the UN-brokered deal that allowed Ukrainian grain to be exported via the Black Sea.
There were several attacks on Odessa in the past couple of weeks, which was quite a change in the situation, but it was really the attack on the cathedral, which is in really the center of the city, a protected part of the city, and in terms of cultural heritage, and therefore within several hundred meters of where most of our staff live and where our office is. So a lot of very shaken up UN staff needed some support, and so I was really down there to speak to them. The second very important part of my visit was going to the cathedral, which I did. I was able to visit inside the cathedral, every single floor of the cathedral. One part of it is really completely damaged. And I'm not a damage or bomb expert, but it was completely damaged. One particular wing of the cathedral, but of course that blast causing a huge amount of damage throughout the cathedral. I think really what very important information that I learned when I was there is that because the air siren had gone off and because the cathedral does have a bunker, there were a number of people from the neighborhood who'd taken shelter in the bunker, of course, not realizing how could they that the cathedral was going to be hit. You've seen in social media that UNESCO has sent in a team of experts. They arrived there over the weekend. I don't have any information yet on what they're finding, but they're looking very closely at the damage, and they will come away with an assessment of the damage. Mykolaiv was similar in that I visited the the block which had been attacked last week. And again, it is civilian infrastructure. These are apartment blocks that were hit, and some of it so badly damaged, it's just going to have to be completely pulled down. That was clear to anyone, and other parts that are badly damaged but can be repaired. I think the important point here, Farhan, is that what we're seeing is being repeated. What I saw in Mykolaiv, what I saw in Odessa last week with my own eyes, is being repeated across many big cities in Ukraine. This morning, again, in Kryvyi, an apartment building was hit. People have been killed, are still under the rubble. I have also issued a statement about that. Over the weekend, again, in Dnipro. It's constant in Kherson, and also over the weekend in Kharkiv. So just a regular targeting of these big cities. We are present in almost all of these places, and if we're not physically present, we're very close by, just down the road. So whether it's Dnipro or Kryvyi this morning, the UN agencies, the NGOs, local volunteers continue to respond, of course, with immediate support, which is shelter, but a lot of times it's also more and more that psychosocial support. So what this means is that the needs of the population are increasing; they are not decreasing. Our humanitarian response plan is only 30% funded. It's almost 1st of August, but it gets cold very early in Ukraine, and you've heard me talk in the past about the winterization. We're already starting to prepare for this. We have thousands and thousands of damaged houses, apartment blocks, since last winter, right? So this is additional damage on top of what we had to deal with last winter. We also continue our frontline deliveries several times a week to all of the frontline oblasts.
When we return, a Dutchman runs from Amsterdam to Kiev to raise funds to buy ambulances for Ukraine. Please stay with us. And now we're joined on the program by Ini John Mekwa in a moment as we look at how the world of business is affected by the war in Ukraine and how Ukraine is coping with it and how Russia is coping with it as well. But before we go to that consideration, the United Nations Resident and Humanitarian Coordinator for Ukraine, Denise Brown, speaking earlier, says that the needs of Ukraine's population are increasing and the more and more psychological support is needed, as she was saying earlier. She was also speaking virtually following the recent trip to the southern Ukrainian cities of Odessa and Mykolaiv. Odessa's ports have been regular targets for Russian attacks since Moscow withdrew on July the 17th from the UN-brokered deal that allowed Ukrainian grain to be exported via the Black Sea. And now, to the business consideration of things. Ini, good morning.
Good morning.
Ini, it's not a secret, or it's even an open secret, that the only reason that Africa is not an economic power broker in the Committee of Nations after the order of the United States, China, and the UK, France, other countries, is because of endemic corruption in some cases, regime change in some cases, mismanagement, bad policies in other cases, is certainly not for want of natural resources.
Obviously not.
Now, with the BRIC meeting coming up now, but it has only South Africa as the only African representative. Do you think at this time that this conflict is opening up Africa to see the potentials of becoming self-reliant, and as many times as you have pointed out on this program, the need to wean ourselves off dependence of commodities such as grain being exported from Ukraine?
So the way I will start that conversation is to point you to Niger, what's going on in Niger. Now, Niger seems to be an irrelevant country, you know, what's Niger? It's, you know, it doesn't even have the population and all of that. But with the coup going on in Niger and the closure of the borders and the ban on exports, uranium, which is a major commodity these days, especially with electric cars and all the electronics and all of that, the price has gone up more than 20%. When did the coup start? So that tells you what Africa has, you know, and if only Africans would just wake up. If we talk about
Does Niger make a lot of uranium? Sorry?
Yes, they're the 7th largest producer of uranium in the world.
Right.
So, I mean, and they're constantly supplying to Europe, to France and all of that, you know. So if Africans would just wake up and look inwards, then, I mean, South Africa, as you said, is the only one that is that seems to have been able to build up the confidence to voice their stance on the continent, to say, oh, well, they've been friends with Russia, friends with Putin, and they're going to keep that up and everything. Other African countries mostly are not able to stand up and do that because of the over-reliance on the Western world. And it's not, look at Nigeria, for instance. We have the crude, yet we cannot refine the crude. We still have to import. Do you know what that's doing to our naira? Do you understand? Apart from that, we have grown, we now have taste for only mostly imported goods. What is that doing to the naira? We wake up, we see our foreign reserve dwindling. We keep on borrowing. Is it not possible to develop our lands, to develop our agriculture? And guess what? When we talk about illegal mining, for instance, in the case of Nigeria, it's mostly non-Nigerians that are doing it. And they're making millions and billions of dollars from that. Meanwhile,
that is a treasure trove in Nigeria that
we
has
have
not been
gold
exploited.
in Nigeria, Lumide.
And it's
we have gold in Nigeria.
It's a major puzzle why
it is.
That will not be a mainstay of Nigerian economy, although we know the reasons why.
So you talked about corruption and,
yes,
and all of that. These are issues in Africa, in developing countries mostly. But guess what? Where did we learn it from, Olumide? I mean, sometimes it's the system that forces people or forces government or leaders, you understand, to sit up. So if we could only develop a system, if you go to the United States, for instance, people also try to beat traffic.
There's also systemic corruption. And it's individuals that are the harbingers of that systemic corruption in all these countries. And if you see what's happening in Western Africa now, the anti-French sentiment that's going on.
Yes, I saw threats of Sierra Leone now, you know.
So there's this, yes, exactly. So there's a sentiment that these colonial powers who are our friends that, you know, ushered us into civilization may not be as friendly as we thought they could have been.
But that's what I've been saying. That's what I've been saying. And that's why I keep saying that we need to take closer looks at some of these goodies coming from the Western world. If Russia offers us so much, what are they getting? I mean, a decent business transaction has to be that you're in business to make profit and so am I.
Right.
If I come into business
I say it's a business, it's not charity, it's business, it's a country, and I just come and say, oh, you have this and have this and have this, you should be suspicious of it because it cost me something to give you those freebies. What am I gaining from it? I'm going to be asking myself that. And when it is not transparent or open, it means it's costing you even much, much more than you think it is because there's something going on under the table.
So we have to take a second look
Close
at all the freebies. Thank you, Ini.
Thank you so much.
Ini John Mekwa. Finally on the program, for the love of charity, a Dutch ultra runner is running from Amsterdam to Kiev to raise funds and demonstrate how close the Ukraine war zone is to Western Europe. His name is Boas Krak-Twitch. He started on July the 22nd and plans to keep running for 2,500 kilometers by running around 50 kilometers a day for 50 days. The aim is to raise money to buy ambulances that Dutch charity Sails of Freedom will take to Ukraine, followed by his manager and a photographer in a caravan in which they will eat and sleep. He is running 40 kilometers to 60 kilometers per day, depending on the distance between the towns.
So we're standing here now, Amsterdam, and phase 1 is to Berlin, 15 days. Then we go in phase 2, deep waters, Berlin to Warsaw, and then we designed phase 3, road to victory, 1,000 kilometer, ending on Kiev. Down here the timeline, 22 of July, and in 50 days, the 10th of September, we hope to arrive. Hopefully not alone, but with a lot of ambulances. That's about 6 months ago. We started brainstorming, organizing a project that was ultra running related. And when we were thinking, like, if we really want to make and reach the news and also want to show people how close by this war is, we just have to run from Amsterdam to Kiev to really to make like a big impact and probably get a lot of donations and raise a lot of money. I wouldn't say I have like a really strong close by connection to Ukraine. I don't have family there. I have a couple people that I know. I've been there in 2018. It's more that I felt kind of my, maybe you can call it duty, but I just thought it's kind of our turn to do something because it's so close by and it's so so terrible what is going on. So just hearing the stories and seeing this war evolving on the news just made me think I have to do something for this war. For 50 days, and it's going to be warm because we're going to drive straight in the summer. So it's going to stink. It's going to be dirty. But we're happy that we have something, and we leave the caravan behind in Kiev, so it has a purpose as well. We're going to use it for a medical team, and we don't have a big budget, so we're already happy that we don't have to sleep only in tents, and that we have a caravan and a roof above us head and a place to cook and sleep. So, yeah, we're all going to be in this caravan for 50 days.
A human road runner drawing attention and awareness of the conflict in Ukraine. That's where we leave it on today's coverage of the issue. I'm Olumide Macaulay. Many thanks to our guests and our producers for today's edition, and you, our viewers, for watching. Do join us again tomorrow, and have a good day. I'm Olumide Macaulay.